Okay, episode 14. Okay, this question is for you today. So one thing I want to ask you, I want to get just for you to think about. What is the value, first, let's just discuss that first. What is the value of putting gymnastic movements into fitness competitions for testing?
Mm-hmm.
Why put them in there?
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with that.
Yeah, what's the value of putting gymnastic movements?
And by gymnastic movements in the form of what we're talking about, it pretty much just means, toe to bar, pull-ups, chest to bar, ring muscle-ups, bar muscle-ups,
handstand push-ups.
Handstand push-ups. Rope climbs to a lesser extent, because that's more of a, you get to use your legs quite a bit in that. Handstand push-ups, handstand walks, right? Yeah. So what's the value of putting those into competition?
What's the value of, well, competitions? Let's just say, clarify what kind of competitions.
Okay, let's just say any competition in which it's more of an intermediate to an advanced type competition, where people that are confident at the open level and those that could compete at regionals are competing in it. Not necessarily people at the games, but people at an intermediate level, to intermediate to advanced level, not an elite level.
Yeah, it's a great question. Quite tough for me. I would just say, in terms of testing, it gives you an idea of physical abilities of the people in many movements. Let's say just pulling or pushing movement in general. Yeah, I think gymnastic movements, you can do a lot of different tests in them. You can put them into, let's say, more strength-based test, or more aerobic-based test, or mix it with different types of movements, let's just say weights, or monostructural work. So like you can put them pretty much almost everywhere, and so they are really, I think, very great predictor of a lot of things. Just absolute upper body pushing or pulling strength.
Relative, right?
Yeah, relative. We can say it has like a max depth of straight handstand push-up, for example.
What happens if your neck's short?
If your neck's short,
what happens if your neck's long? What happens if you have short forearms?
Yeah.
Where does it fit then? So that's on one
example. Yeah,
itself.
It's very generalized, and maybe some people are not very comfortable with those movements, and some people are more comfortable with those movements. The same thing with pulling movements like chest to bar pull-ups. Taller people with longer arms, as opposed to, or compared to, like shorter athletes with shorter arms. It's very different to. You can compare those type of athletes all together, because obviously some type of athletes would have more advantage in certain type of movements and whatnot. But I see a lot of benefits or positive things in putting gymnastics into competitions. What I'm thinking.
What do you think the most common mistake from your idea with regards to designing fitness tests or competitions? What do you think one of the biggest mistakes are with gymnastic movements, with using them?
Probably, let's just say that all our athletes are able to perform them. And maybe one of the problems could be the volume of the repetitions in one event or one day, it doesn't matter. So if you have like this year regionals event with lots of rope climbs combined with thrusters, it was all about the rope
The
climbs.
whole event was rope climbs.
Yeah, like the thrusters, the weight was very light, and in my opinion, that specific event was not balanced properly in terms of program design or prescription. Yeah, sometimes you can overload some local muscles, which causes, let's say, more risk of injury in next events. Yeah, it's very easy to overload people with a lot of repetitions.
Okay, so here's a question for you. So then, with my competition, with our competition, the one you're going to do in September outside the box, the one thing that is clear is that we don't do, like, I don't put much gymnastics into the event, and that's on purpose.
Yeah.
Because it's not meant to be a CrossFit style competition. So when individuals do it, and specifically girls at, like, I would say it's more evident for girls that are kind of intermediate at a maximum, like they finish 200th-ish in the open, give or take 100 spots depending on the region.
In what region?
Depends on the region. That's what I mean. So in Europe, they may be 500, but in Canada West, they may be 200. So the one thing that is noticed right away is that when I want strength to be tested, I do it in other areas. I do it in a whole body approach. It's like, if we're going to test strength, we're not going to test strength of your elbow extensors. We're going to test the strength of your body. That's the way I do it.
Yes.
And if we're going to test the power, we're going to test the power of your body. And if we're going to test the endurance, we're going to test the endurance of your body, not the endurance of your forearm muscles. Right? Like, that's a very, to me, that's just the way I design it. And females that can excel at CrossFit at the open level even, they do very poorly in our event. Very poorly. Because the reason they get by, even in events like the regionals, is because they're strong in their upper body. And they get by on that over and over and over.
Yeah.
But when really only two events out of maybe 9 in our competition are determined by upper body strength, they do quite poorly. And people that they would do much better than in the open, they can't even compete with them in our competition. So what do you think that means? So what does that mean to you? So, like, that's what I said for intermediate level people. For people at the advanced level, it's a little less of an issue, because they're all fairly good at gymnastics and they can all pretty much do it all unbroken. So it goes back to being more of an aerobic type limitation for them. Not always, but for the most part, it becomes more of an aerobic and a work capacity type limitation. But for people that are at the intermediate stage of development, and again, so like, or maybe if they're not even at their development, that's just their stage, that's where they are. All you're testing amongst those people in those types of events is who's strongest relative to their body weight. That's all you're testing, and you're testing for height. Really, you're testing to see who's taller than the other person. Because that's what you're getting out of strict handstand push-ups, the deficit. And that's what you're getting with, like, lots of chest bar pull-ups. Yeah, so then think about it in terms of that individual who struggles with that. What's the value of gymnastic testing for those individuals? So I think what I'm getting at is that, do you think gymnastics should be tested as mostly as a work capacity type environment, or should be tested as a strength environment?
Well, yeah.
And they're not the same things. If you're listening, they're not the same things.
Based upon what you said, I think the gymnastic movement should be tested as a part of some other movements, combined with, not specifically being alone as a single modality test. It's really great to see how well you perform on certain type of tests. Let's say 5 minutes of straight handstand push-ups, because you have to compare yourself to other people.
But that test is I only use that test because there's CrossFit.
Yeah.
So take CrossFit out of it and take that whole idea out of it, and just imagine you were presenting your idea of fitness testing to 1,000 other professional coaches from soccer, hockey, basketball, volleyball, track and field, rugby, football, and you were telling them what your fitness test is and why you're doing it.
I think your own tests in your competition are more performance tests compared to events used in CrossFit competitions, because they are more purely CrossFit events, and it's not the same. It's not the same. So I think that your events have much better ability to predict ability of athletes in general, like not just only in CrossFit events or CrossFit competitions, but yeah, like your approach in testing is more broad. And
It's so the one thing I always talk to people about, which is another discussion we should have. Write that down. Yeah, like, so the one thing I always talk with people about is that each event is supposed to be predictive. Each of our events is supposed to be predictive because we only get 3 days to test you, and there's probably, like, you know, hundreds of different things you'd want to know. But if you sum it all up and you're kind of getting 90% of the picture if you do a really good job of testing, right? And that's why I think it has to follow a certain standard, and that's the way I want to do it, and I will do it. And there's going to be the similar things year to year, but there will be variation within that, because I do agree with CrossFit's stance on that. There should be variation in testing, specifically with fitness, because we don't have a defined test that's perfect. But there will be limitations within that test. There always will. There will always be limitations within the test. And people will point and go, well, there's not enough of this, not enough of that. But the thing is, once you start adding this and that in, you start removing the other things, which I believe are more important. So I look at it in terms of a hierarchy. It's like, if there's 10 things you want to be included, or it's like the first thing I always want included, actually I think the last 2 years of our competition I was like, if you only had 3 things to test, only 3 events to test, who was fittest amongst 5,000 individuals, what's the type of things you would do? And like, let's just say specifically amongst 5,000 CrossFitters. I always say, I was like, I'd want to know their clean and jerk maximum. I'd want to know how high they could jump. I want to know how fast they could run, probably a mile. I'd want to know those 3 things. And that'll give you a pretty damn good idea on the person.
Yeah.
And then it's like, what else would you want? It's like, well, what's next? Well, maybe a short, really hard event. Okay.
Repeatability.
Yeah. So then what's next after that? What else do you want to know? It's like, I want to know the handstand walking. It's like, no, you don't. That's the wrong answer. How about you do something longer and more enduring? Okay, let's do that. Well, you're starting to run out of events. It's like, that's it. Like, that's all the things we have. So that's the way I approach it. And to me, unless we have a 5-day competition, handstand walking will never see the light of day.
I think that your test or your competition is more based on I just forgot what I wanted to say. The competitions for CrossFit events are more testing of, what you say, testing movements as opposed to testing energy systems. Yeah. Or some performance, more general performance.
Yeah. So
that's the difference.
Yeah. Well, CrossFit competitions largely come down to testing movements, right? They test your endurance and your capability in those movements, and that's what we got started with gymnastics. Because that's typically what comes down to being tested, right? Yeah. It comes down to your ability for your arms to work under a lot of fatigue and be strong relative to your mass. That's what a lot of success in CrossFit comes down to. Yeah. If you're good at that, plus you're strong, plus you are very aerobically capable, you're going to be pretty damn good.
This is why we see some people and some variants in top 5 or top 3 qualifiers every year in each region. I'm not talking about the really top athletes who will perform great at everything, but those, let's say, 3rd, 4th, 5th place every every year. What those places are pretty much different every year, and
it's up to chance.
yeah, it's up to chance and based upon the events and the moments. You know.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the games sometimes it's the same. Okay, Rich Froning is genius. He's the best.
Mm-hmm.
But
where people finish after that,
yeah,
after last year's, where people finish after that is highly dependent on what's designed.
yeah.
Even though people wouldn't agree with that,
Yeah.
I totally believe that placing for the large majority of individuals at the regionals games is dependent on the design of the event.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I agree.
All right, that's good.
Thanks.